Let's talk about how to mix low end, and in this video, specifically your kick drum. That's coming up on Home Music Studio One. All right, hey friends, Dave Maxey here from Home Music Studio One. This is a place where you can learn to produce professional quality home music studio recordings, and you can do that even on a limited budget. Super glad that you are joining me here. We're going to be starting a series talking about how to mix low end, and in this video, we're going to start with how to mix your kick drum specifically. And a couple things that before we jump on in that I do have to preface this. First of all, Rome was not built in a day. Building pro quality mixes is an art form with a little bit of science in there, but it is not something that you can learn in 30 seconds. So if you're watching this video and you're saying, hey, Dave, if you could just go ahead and show me everything you've learned in the last 25 years in like the next 2 minutes tops, yeah, that'd be great. I got to be honest with you, this is probably not a video for you. This is something, guys, that is really important. If you really want to take your craft up the next level, it's going to take time, and you got to be okay with that. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you some of the most common things that I do to dial in my kick drum, but it's not going to be helpful for you if you're just trying to rush and hurry and just trying to quickly slap a plug-in on and really have no clue of what's going on. What I'm going to show you is something that will work if you look at these areas and you really get the concept behind what I'm showing you. Doesn't matter what recording software you're using. Doesn't matter what setup you have, whether you're using a live drum set, which I'll demo here, or whether you're using an in-the-box virtual instrument, right? These are techniques that are going to apply to all of them. And so super critical, important. It takes time to learn the craft. Number two, I want to answer, like, what do we mean when we say how to mix your low end? What are we talking about when we say how to mix low end? I'm referring to that frequency range from about 200 hertz on down. And this is the space that's critical to any mix, whether it's a live mix or whether it's a recording mix. And the reason being is this is the space where you actually feel music, where you feel sound waves in general. When you get into this lower region, sometimes we'll have a bottom end that's too high or a low range that's boosted up too much in a mix, and that will tend to like clip out speakers, and it could sound very distorted in some cases, and it might not sound very good in headphones, even though it might be okay in a large PA that could handle a lot of bottom. The same would be true if you do the opposite. If you build a mix that doesn't have enough low end, then you're not going to feel anything in that mix. So on one hand, if it's too hot, you're going to feel too much, and it's going to be unpleasing. If it's not enough, you're not going to feel anything, and that's very uninspiring in a mix. And so we want to dial this region in just perfectly, if at all possible, so that we can get the best sounding projects as we can. And it is definitely possible even with some limited tools. So let's talk specifically about kick drum. There are a handful, 5 or 6 things that always seem to rise to the top for me, whether I'm recording a virtual kick drum sampled instrument or whether I'm recording an acoustic kick drum. And I want to show you a project here. We'll kind of demo this a little bit. This was an evening that I recorded with a group of friends. We did about an hour and a half of live music, and there was about maybe 80 people or so in the room with us. And we had a full drum set this evening. I played acoustic and sang. We had 2 ladies that sang with me as well, a violin player. We had a piano player there as well who sang, an electric guitar player who sang, and bass guitar. It was a super fun night. This is about an hour and a half of a project here that I'm starting to mix. And really, I'm actually dialing into this section right here, which is kind of an instrumental section that happened during the evening. So let me play a little bit of this for you so you can kind of hear where we're at right now. I've not done a ton to this mix. I've done a little bit of dialing into my overheads and my snare, but what you're hearing on the kick drum is actually exactly as it was recorded that evening. I did a little bit of panning, a little bit of treatment on some of the other instruments that you'll hear here, but again, nothing to the kick drum. So let's take a listen. Okay, straight up, I think that sounds like pretty stinking good as it is. You might disagree with me. That's totally cool. That's up to you. But I think it sounds pretty good as it is. Let's solo this out and hear what we've got. Okay, so when you listen to this kick drum in the context of the mix, it sounds like one thing. When you dial into it and we zero it out, you're hearing that it's an open tune kick drum. There's no pillow or anything inside of it, and you can hear kind of the room noise. You can hear the gal that was singing at this time. You can hear all the other instrumentation bleeding through a little bit on that mic. But I will say this, in the context of the mix, one of the reasons it sounds actually pretty good to start out with is because we considered the instrument first. So we started out with a relatively decent kick drum. Actually, this wasn't even a super duper high end kick drum, but a middle of the road. I think it was a Birch kit. Started with a good kick drum and a good drummer. And more so than just a good drummer, at least whether you've got a year under your belt or 20 years, someone that understands dynamics. I don't want to point out here, if I zero in just a little bit, look at the different ups and downs, peaks across this kick drum. You are not seeing a slammed kick drum pedal to the metal from start to finish. Look at the different dynamic volumes that you see in the kick drum throughout. Really, this is just one song. So we got some soft kick happening here on into really this high peak here. And then there's a few here. So we've got dynamics in the kick drum. That's critical. Because if you're recording a live kick drum and you've got a drummer who is just slamming it pedal to the metal every time, you're typically going to lose some low information out of that kick drum. It's not going to have a warm sound. It's going to sound very top end or very beater, very tick sounding, not necessarily going to have a lot of bottom end to it, and it's going to be very difficult to mix. So when it comes to how to mix low end and specific to kick drum, start with a good instrument. Start with a drummer that knows how to give dynamics and they're not just going 100% at all times. The other thing that we paid attention to was we used an actual kick drum microphone. Now, this was a Sennheiser, one of the 900 series microphones. I think I got it used for around $200. This was not $1,000, $1,500, $2,500 microphone. We had the microphone on a small boom stand. It was about halfway inside the drum. It was also about halfway between the center of the drum and the outer shell of the drum. There was no muffling inside that drum. That's where we placed the mic. The other thing that was critical that evening is we paid attention to tuning the kick drum. This is something that a lot of guys miss, a lot of gals miss. You just kind of set up a kit and, hey, if it sounds great, it sounds great. The simplest way that I find to get a kick drum started to where it's likely going to give you a good shot at recording it well is to loosen the heads. And then bring all the lugs fully loose, but then go back down to just finger tight till they just start to bite in. And then I like to tighten them cross, start at one lug, and then go down to the next one fully across, and then keep working your way around. I'll do quarter turns until both of those heads don't have any wrinkles in them. And usually when the wrinkles just disappear, I find a really good place to start as far as tuning a kick drum. There's lots of information on the interwebs regarding how to tune drums. So if you need to spend a little more time doing that, it's critical. So we start out with a good instrument. We started with a drummer that could play with really good dynamics. We started out with a kick drum microphone in the right placement. There's lots of ways that you could do that, but I described how we did it. And we started with a tuned instrument. Those four things gave us this right from the get-go. I'll play it one more time. Okay, and I want to show you here that I've got nothing on this track. Nothing is happening as far as any EQ. There's no gating. There's no nothing. So these are, if you start with the right source from the beginning, you can really make a knockout project. And this is why this matters. Now you might be thinking, Dave, hey, I'm in my basement by myself and it's just me and my guitar. I don't have a full drum kit. How can I mix kick drum? How can I record kick drum? I highly recommend, if you don't have access to acoustic instruments, to get a great virtual drum set, a virtual VSTI or a virtual instrument. My recommendation out of all of the things that I've used that are out there is to look at the XLN audio products, specifically Addictive Drums. I'll leave a note in the show notes. I'll leave a link in the show notes for that. And here's why. I'm using Addictive Trigger, which is the same VST, only it's designed to look at the acoustic file, or I should say the wave file, and to then translate those peaks into a digital version or a virtual instrument. Now, I've got this instrument pulled up right here, and I won't go into how to use this, but let me just say, if you don't have a kick drum, or you have a very poor sounding kick drum, or guys, I have done this before with a cajon. I've turned a cajon into a kick drum. I have tuned stomping on a table in a low register into a kick drum by using this plugin. I'm going to do this. I'm going to zero in on the kick drum, and I'm just going to turn Addictive Trigger on. What this is doing is it is looking at that wave file, and it is converting that wave file into the peaks and the valleys dynamically into a virtual drum that I can now select different kick drums with. So this is off right now. We'll play the original, and then I'll turn it on and let you hear the difference. Here we go. Okay, now I'll turn it on. Off. On. Okay, now if I did nothing but simply convert the WAV file into this virtual instrument, let's listen to that in the context of the mix. Go ahead and close this window here. Here is the Addictive Trigger now. All right, so hopefully you're hearing the difference in that on your end. Like, it is pretty outstanding, and as far as my opinion, we started out great, but when you have this option, you can really go to the next level. So if you don't have access to a nice tuned kick drum, or let's face it, sometimes we don't have the time to tune things up. Sometimes we don't always have access to an incredible kit. Sometimes, maybe we're not the best drummer in the world, or we have a drummer who's a little more inexperienced. Good news is, with the right tools, if you save up and do a little bit of investment. In fact, I'll have some discounted rates to this plugin if you're interested. Again, I'll make sure to have that in the description. It can really go a long ways at making a big difference. But all we've done with this plugin at this point is we've just converted our audio into a digital trigger here. Now we've got some different kick drums. I'm going to leave it on this one because I don't want to dive too deep in how to use Addictive Trigger. But there's some few other things that I've done here. If I open up my effects here, the first thing I actually do if I turn Addictive Trigger off is I want to noise gate what is happening, and I've got a couple different options. One, I've been a big fan. I've been experimenting with the Slate digital plugins, monthly membership, and it's under like $20 a month, and you get access to some super cool stuff. So there's a gate in here that I'll use. We'll show the difference between that and the Reaper gate, which comes with Reaper. So for right now, let's just start with the original kick drum. No Addictive Trigger now. Let's just hear the difference between noise gating and not noise gating. We'll zero into the kick. Okay, so we're starting to clean that up just a little bit and taking some of the background noise out of there. This is the Reaper gate. You can kind of see the settings that I'm using there. If I turn this one off, let's just listen to the Slate digital gate, which is pretty cool as well. Same idea. Okay, so we're cleaning that up. I would normally start with an EQ. If I needed to EQ a kick drum, I would typically start with, let's do this. I'll add an EQ on the front end here, and let's go all the way up to the top. So one of the first things that I'll do in regards to dial in a kick drum, we'll kind of zoom this in here. I guess we're already zoomed in. I'll do a high pass filter. And this band over here, high pass filter, we're allowing only the highs to pass through. And I'll usually run this somewhere, depending on the style of music, somewhere around under 40. If it's more of a dance style kick, I might go a little closer to 30, but in this case, just a hair under 40. And the reason being, this is just kind of noise area. There's just a lot of rumble in that. It's energy that is unnecessary. So from there, one of the things that I'll do next is a critical frequency inside a kick drum is actually 50 and 60 hertz. The difference in styles of music have everything to do with just how much 50 you got in there. If you got a lot of 50, it tends to be more house techno. If you need a little bit more 60 and a little less 50, it often has to be more rock. And you can play with huge differences in sound just by the amount of 50 or 60 hertz that are in a kick drum. And that is the absolute critical area of that space. So spend some time learning what those sounds like and learning what they do. In this case, listening to this drum, I would actually put a little bit of 60 in there just to give us a little bit more bottom. And you can see I'm not going anything super crazy. I'm just kind of bumping that 60 up a little bit. Often the next thing I would do on a kick drum is I find that sometimes the mud zone in many kick drums can be somewhere around 150. So often I'll do this. I'll just go down to 150 and I'll do a relatively narrow curve here because I'm just kind of carving out a little bit of bottom end in the perfect world. I listen to this kind of sweep through here, just giving you some starter places. And for right now, let's just kind of listen to what we got started here on this kick. We'll turn the EQ off for a second and then I'll kick it back on. Okay, I'll tell you what, just for sake of time, let's flip on over to this noise gate right here. And let's see how that sounds. And you guys, you can play with different placements of order of these. Let's just see if we try that gate like in front of it, see the difference in sound. So pull this back up. There we go. So now we've got our noise gate effectively happening, and then we've got our EQ in the back there. We'll do an A-B on the EQ. Okay, and there's not a huge difference of what's happening here. Again, because we started with a great instrument, but this is a good place for you guys to start. The next thing that I would often do, depending on what's happening, is I may give a little bit of mid cut. I'm going to put this over to band, and this is going to be anywhere from that 250 to 500. In this case, guys, I don't think it needs it, but if you've got a kick drum that has sounded like really muddy, it doesn't have a lot of meat to it, you can kind of play with a little bit of low or a mid-cut, kind of that muddy zone, which is really from 250 to about 500 hertz. If we cut that area just a little bit, I'm using kind of a wide curve. What does this sound like? Okay, it's not bad at all. I mean, I could live with it, could live without it. But as we're going along here, these are kind of some places that I start. The next thing I would do, I'm going to add one more high-end shelf. Now, here's a mistake that I've seen happen often, and that's the thought process of, hey, this is kick drum, so I don't need any high information in it. A lot of times I'll see this. I'll see a low-pass filter, and that low-pass filter be like somewhere down here. And the reason this is a mistake is because you lose definition. Now, we said that 200 on down is where you can feel the kick drum. Absolutely. But you also need to hear the kick drum. If you can't hear the kick drum, you're going to have a hard time pulling that out of a mix. And so I like to usually somewhere around 7K, I will use actually a band. And 7K in a kick drum represents where that beater is happening. If you don't have enough beater in there, you're going to have a hard time actually hearing a kick drum within a mix. And how much of that beater, more or less, really has a lot to do with the style of music that you're mixing. So let me do this. I'm going to open this all the way up, and then I'm going to kind of slide my low pass filter down and let you hear the difference of it versus having that range in there. Let's listen. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've helped students out looking at a kick drum, and this is similar to what I've seen. All of the top end go on because, hey, it's kick, right? We don't need any top end. Not true at all. Listen to what this does in the context of the mix. We'll open this back up again. Listen to it in the mix. Okay, so hugely important. These are key frequencies in dialing in a kick drum. So what I would normally do as opposed to low pass filters, I would put this either on a high shelf or a band. Right now, let's just use a high shelf, which means when I lift this up, everything in front of that's going up with it, just kind of passing through. And here's the key frequency, 7 hertz right here, or 7K. This is the area again where that beater is, and what I'm going to do is in the context of the mix, I'm going to push this up or leave it more level and let you hear the difference of how that kick drum actually pops out. And keep in mind, we've not done anything to the bottom at all in this case, so let's take a listen. Okay, and that is actually pretty good, right? So we've got a little bit of area that helps us get definition to our kick drum, right? So this is roughly where I would start. These are, you guys can see my numbers here. Even though, again, this is not a science, it's an art form. These are the spaces that I encourage you to begin to play with and learn what these frequency ranges are doing to your instrument. If you start with a great source, it's really quick and easy to get a good kick drum sound. I would start in the same general area, even if I were doing live sound. But this is great for recording as well. It's a good place to start. So from there, we'll leave that EQ on. We've got our gate, in this case, in front of that. That's fine. It's working out. In fact, if I flip over, we can go to the Reaper gate, and we'll throw that up there, see if we hear a difference in the sound there versus the Slate Digital. Yeah, that still works, so no worries there. In this case, again, we're not even using the Addictive Trigger, but we absolutely could. You'll see I've got another EQ there. If I enable the Addictive Trigger, I really kind of wanted to give just a little bit of that almost 1K boost in there. That's why this EQ is in there. So let me just kind of A-B with that Addictive Trigger back on. Okay. Effectively, when I turn on Addictive Trigger, it is making this first EQ that we did with basically a moot point. So it's not doing anything because all we're doing is that audio is being driven into Addictive Trigger that is converting that into MIDI data. And so what you're hearing in that case is just the options that you would have with Addictive Trigger or some type of virtual instrument. I just wanted to get you the what that sound like. So for right now, we'll turn those off. The next thing I would typically do is add a little bit of compression, just kind of tighten things up a little bit. And again, because we're not going to use Addictive Trigger just for this demo, I don't need this next EQ. So what I am going to do though is get a little bit of gain reduction in here, and I want the I could give you numbers all day. I could give you some kind of formula, but I'll tell you what, I like to look at this musically when I set a compressor. I like to see about maybe 4 dB of gain reduction, which is going to show up in this meter. And I want to see that gain reduction go up and down at roughly the same timing and tempo as that kick drum is being hit, and decay at the rate that I want that kick drum to decay. And so let's take a look and see what we've got there. Okay, so I've just lowered my threshold at roughly a 4-to-1 ratio. I've lowered that threshold to see in the neighborhood of 3 for gain reduction. I've left my attack at default, but I slowed down my release till you could see that gain reduction disappear at the same rate as my kick drum is decaying. So that's kind of how we've got to there. We've got another in this virtual mix rack. This is just the Slate Digital plugin. There's an EQ that's on here, which right now I'll turn off and make sure that that is, let's turn this plugin on. We'll go ahead and that's off right there. Okay. And then there's just a compressor here. Same concept, same idea. Let's hear just what the Slate Digital compressor sounds like. Okay, so same concept, same idea. We're just using a different plugin. This EQ right here, again, was disabled. If I had this Addictive Trigger on, I might do some tweaks in there, but that's why that was there. And we're almost done as far as what I would do here, but for right now, I'm going to go back to the Recomp just so we're using Reaper plugins. Just want to give you guys a couple different options. If you don't have the Slate Digital and you're not paying for that, and you're using Reaper, you can get access, obviously, to these for free. So we've got our compressor going on in there. The next thing that I would like to do is make sure that I've got enough of that 50 or 60 hertz. And in this case, I think the kick drum has given us all we need in the 60 range. I do feel good about that. I'll bring our frequency analyzer in so you can see a little bit more of what's happening now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add really kind of some sub-harmonic area in that 50 range. I'm not just boosting the EQ, I'm adding sound additionally to my original sound and on top of what we already tweaked. And I'm gonna start with this plugin called Huge Booty. which is not a problem I have, frankly. But this problem does solve a lot of issues with kick drum for not getting enough bottom in it. And so here's what this plugin is doing. I'm going to look at the range of right about 50 hertz and then mix this in, and it's going to add some subharmonic bottom to that. I'll zero in on this kick drum right now with this off, and I want to let you hear the AB. Now I'll turn it on. Now I'm going to bring the mix up and the drive. Let's turn it off. All right. Off, on again. Feel that huge booty kicking in there. Yeah, so this is a great enhancement to most any kick drum. I will use it on bass guitar, but that's a whole other video as well. This plugin, our bass from Waves, same idea, just gives you another way to accomplish the same thing. And I'm looking again at that 50 hertz range, and I'm just pumping a little bit more bottom in there. Totally just depends on what access you have to, but let's do an AB with this guy. Yeah, so see, we're adding definitely some bottom in there, and we're making sure that that is represented in our full frequency response. The last thing I'll let you do is hear this in the context of the mix, and then I'll do one AB with that using the Addictive Trigger just so you can hear the difference in those two kick drums. But notice where the kick is peaking out versus the snare drum. I often try to match those together. Again, this is an instrumental spot. There's no vocals here, but hey, let's take a listen in the context of the mix, and we'll do an AB here with the huge booty, which is part of Reaper versus the R bass. Which, guys, I think that actually sounds really good. So one more, we'll turn on the Addictive Trigger, which is effectively just using this first half to just trigger MIDI. So this EQ and this gate is no longer effective in that case. But listen to the difference of what we could get here if this is the route that we go. Again, if you look in Addictive Trigger, just the quick view, in case you're wondering, this is the EQ that I'm doing Addictive Trigger. So I'm pushing a little bit of that 7K, pulling down a little bit of that muddy range, and the rest of this actually sounds good out of the box on Addictive Trigger. So let's listen to this. All right, so honestly, we started out with a great kick drum. I could almost go either way, whether I use the Addictive Trigger or the original one. They both sound great in their own right. But these are the areas that I focus on most when I'm trying to dial in my bottom end specific to the kick drum. Thanks for if you're still watching me. Thanks for joining me to this far. If you've got questions, guys, please leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer anything that I can. And with that, this is Dave from Home Music Studio One. We'll catch you later.